Hello and welcome back to the podcast. In this episode, I had a blast interviewing Brian Maggi. Brian's been involved in the technology world and he's worked on all kinds of things that we just take for granted now. He worked on some communication, some chat for distributed teams before the web was the web. So he's been around for a while, and he worked at Apple in the early days and then went back later on. He's done a bunch of different product things, and he's got some really interesting insight as always on leadership because that's the thing that we love talking about. Hope you enjoy this interview as much as I enjoyed chatting with him. This is awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, sure, no problem. I'm always up to being talked to.
Great. Well, like 10,000 questions. So, I think you and I met when you were at Postini
Oh, maybe. I mean, that was many, many moons ago.
because my former wife was one of your salespeople.
Oh, then this would have been you. You might not have met me because I was. I mean, Scott and I started the company, and then I left before it really blew up.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, so that's a long story, but yeah. So I wasn't at Postini once it was like in offices and things like that. So
Okay.
I got
Okay.
out early, to avoid the big payoff.
Oh, well, that was silly of you. What were you thinking?
Yeah, well, who knows? I also left Apple that same week, so that was a very expensive week for me.
Oh, ouch. Lessons learned,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So anybody who's watching this, stick around a little bit longer if you're in a company. That might be helpful.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, when I left at the time, it was the right thing to do, and I didn't look back on, I didn't regret
Good.
anything. I mean, Scott is an amazing guy, and I wish him nothing but success, and I wanted to see him succeed. Um,
Hmm.
it wasn't right for me at the time personally, but as far as like he and I we still talk, so it's
Oh, good. Awesome. Excellent.
yeah.
We're kind of jumping into like the middle of this. So,
Oh, sure, sure, sure. I don't want to
which,
spoil it.
yeah. So, spoiler alert.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So the whole purpose of this podcast is just talking about leadership and people's leadership experiences. My focus has been running software teams here in the Valley for 20 plus years,
Hmm.
both direct reports as well as I've been in product management a bunch, product ownership. So there's been a lot of dotted line stuff.
Oh, okay,
Um,
cool.
and so for me, a lot of the things that I've always been curious about has been how do you influence teams to operate effectively when you don't have the authority. Like I'm not the CEO, right? So I can't tell everybody in the company,
Yeah,
because I said so. And so, from the product perspective, it was always how do I get the teams to do what I need when I can't just say because I'm the boss, right?
right.
So that's kind of the framing, the perspective that I come at this with. So the question I always ask guests at the very beginning is, what's your origin story for getting into the world of technology and ultimately into leadership?
So it's a funny path. I mean, I was studying. I was at University of Illinois back in the late '80s, early '90s, and I was a subject in an experiment. Let's call it that.
Okay.
So I was originally an art major at a very big engineering school, constantly being asked what I was going to do with that degree. And then I had switched to communication because, why not? Art to communication and engineering school, keep staying in my lane. But this class, I was in a PR class, and the professor volunteered all of us to take part in this experiment that was being conducted by a professor in the communication department named Nashir Contractor. Really amazing guy. He's now at Kellogg, and they were studying NCSA. So if you're not familiar with the Center for Supercomputing Applications in Champaign, where Mosaic, the first commercial browser, came out. So they were working on other stuff at the time, and they were interested in the effects of collaborative technology on group communication. And so all of us, communication students went into this experiment, and it was really neat. We had these computers that were connected, on a local network, and we were using you know, really old technology today. I mean, we were using these apps that we call we were using apps just basically to see if we could make decisions together and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And the assignment we were given was like it was like an individual's decision to make. So when I was done with our session, there was four of us in it. I said to the TA that was running the session that this didn't seem very realistic because a group wouldn't make this decision. This is a decision like an individual would make. And he's like, oh, so like, what would you do to make it more realistic? And I said, I don't know, give a group decision. Like I don't know, have them just try to do something simple like decide on lunch. Because that seems pretty hard with a group. And so my smart aleck comment got me noticed. The professor said, well, give him something to do. So I got a job transcribing all the tapes and the audio from all these
Oh my
hours and
God.
hours of sessions. But it was great because it led to working with Nosh and becoming his research assistant. And then finally, he helped. I got to be part of his research, and I helped teach his class. And it all culminated with us presenting our findings on the effects of these technologies back in 90, 91, which you can imagine are pretty primitive compared to what we have today.
Right, right.
But we presented our findings to the team at NCSA, and on that panel was Mark Andreessen, who was also
Oh
a
wow.
undergrad. He was working at NCSA as a programmer there. I mean, I didn't know who he was. He didn't know who I was at the time, and we were both nobodies. I'm still a nobody. He's who he is. But we presented our information to him, and one of the insights we found was that with technology, in a situation like this, oftentimes what happens is the people with technical skills are often perceived and conflated as subject matter experts just because their technology skills are better. And that was just something to look out for. And this was in the days when DOS was still the number one operating system. So the panel's response, we were really excited because we were talking about making things easier to use and whatnot. And the response was kind of like RTFM. Like it just kind of fell flat, and we were kind of despondent. But I didn't care because I was going to Apple Computer as an intern, and I was going to be working on this futuristic device while these guys were going to be dabbling in this thing called the internet. And I went to go at Apple to work on. I'll be right back.
Yeah,
on,
that's so funny.
on a thing called, if anybody remembers these,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Newton. So
Newton, of
yeah.
course.
So I was going to go work in Silicon Valley on one of the hottest things. And I didn't know what I was going to be working on. They didn't tell me. But that's how that happened. So I went to Apple. This was in 1992. And you know, that's the rest is other history.
Other history. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And yeah, I remember the Newtons. And once upon a time we had one.
yeah, yeah, I have a couple. As a good friend of mine says, we made the only size people didn't want.
Oh,
But
well, hang on, wait a minute. That's about to be the new size of the Samsung phone.
yeah,
Just
I know, phablets and stuff. It's almost the same thickness too, right?
yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, yeah.
I will say though, the industrial design on this thing still has holds up. I mean, it's still a pretty slick looking device.
Hmm.
So what could have
That is
been?
very cool. Yeah. So when you went to Apple, you were an intern.
Yeah,
Clearly, they weren't making you in charge of anybody. That doesn't sound like a leadership title, at least most companies I've been at.
yeah.
So how did you go? Like, kind of, what was your progression up the stack when you started moving into leadership roles?
Well, I mean, part of the reason I left Apple was that there didn't seem to be. It was I started Apple as an intern. I worked for them. I left. I came back in the 90s. I was there late 96, 97, right about when Steve came back, Steve Jobs
Hmm.
came back and really, turned things around. But when I came back the second time around in the late 90s, things were going really badly for the company. And
Right.
it's hard for people to realize now that the company almost went out of business. But, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it was a fairly flat organization. So there wasn't a lot of management to be done or be managed because we had a lot less people then. I think we were down to like 10,000 employees or something like that or less.
Hmm.
And one of the things, and one of the motivations I had to start Postini in general was that it just felt like Apple was starting to layer more and more management on top of me. It got to the point where it felt like there was like a 1-to-1 ratio. So it didn't seem like we needed as much. I don't feel like we needed that much management. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it
Right.
started to feel like, you're losing the autonomy. So I left mainly because I have more of like a drive for autonomy and
Hmm.
entrepreneurship. So it wasn't until really when I left Apple, I went to go work for a startup, and then that was my first job where I actually had some people reporting to me.
How was that?
It was interesting. I liked it. I learned a lot of hard lessons from that. Now, I was a terrible manager there because I there's moments I think some of it I just kind of interpret some things about me in management as being a jerk. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, some of it was like I was their jerk. I was, like button heads with other managers and other teams, but my guys, it was very polarizing experience in the sense that like I was a faction builder. I had my allies on one side and I had my detractors on the other. And I I really didn't do a good job. I wasn't really ready for it. You know what I mean? It was really more like me and my team are going to do these things, and this is how we're going to do them, and I'm going to be bossy, and I'm going to look out for my people, but I'm also going to go to the mat, and take on the other teams that people were having trouble with. So I think I started a lot of arguments, and I was kind of pushy about stuff, and I'm not, not really happy with who I was in that job.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a really good self awareness, and thank you for the vulnerability. I appreciate that.
Well,
Yeah,
well, it's self-awareness now. Back then, it was,
yeah. Well, but
it was,
it's hindsight.
it was called to my
Hopefully,
attention that I was not.
yeah. What got you to start to evolve and change into something else, and to look back on it the way you do?
I, a string of humbling experiences, I think, kind of have it, in the career. I think I just started to realize, you know, after I left that startup, I wasn't there very long, and I just didn't like the way it felt. Like I'd kind of alienated a personal friend who had brought me into the company,
Mm,
and I just wasn't being effective. And then I left. We moved. My wife and I, we had our son was really young at the time. Part of the reason, why I was focused on some of the, like I started just kind of focus on my personal life. So we moved back to Chicago, and ended up in another place where I was working, and I had people working for me, and I was making similar mistakes at this new place. But what I was just finding out was that just being like force of will isn't going to get stuff done. And I started to think about some managers I'd had in the past that I used to be kind of prickly about. Like one of my first bosses at Apple, um, was at first I remember being like, oh, what now? What now? She'd drag me to the office and give me some, and at first I was like, now, later as I matured, I realized like what a great boss she was and how helpful she was helping me figure things out. And so I started to think about like how I'm not like those good managers I had who were really good about, clearing the brush for you so you can get your job done.
hmm.
I guess I interpreted being a manager more as like, I've got all the ideas, everybody just execute them. You know what I mean?
Right,
And
right,
instead of being like, you know what, if they're successful, I'm successful. That's where it kind of took the turn where it was like, who cares? Who cares who like who don't care about yourself as much. If the team's successful, that's just as good as if not better than if you're successful as an individual.
right.
So that was those are, I mean, it took a little time to learn that.
Is there any, like, did somebody say something? Were you reading books?
Well, I
Because
got fired.
it's fine.
I
Okay.
got fired at the second place where it didn't work, but it was an interesting thing because um again, it was another situation where it was like very polarized group where I had my team, I had my fans, and I had the other side didn't. And the reason I was fired is I was making it uncomfortable by being pretty um, confrontational with this one particular person that a lot of people really didn't like, and I kind of took it upon myself to be the guy that took them on, and it turned out like it just created a lot of strife, and that this was a company that valued team cohesion probably more than progress, and so I got fired, but they also gave me an offer to be like, if you just kind of go, we'll hire you back as a consultant. And I was like, wow, that was a great deal because I hate coming here. Like I hate coming to this office. I hated the commute. I hated where it was at. I didn't like the environment, but I was like, I didn't mind the job. So all of a
Right.
sudden it was like, wow, this is great. And then that turns out I ended up getting along great with the guy that I was fighting with all the time. All of a sudden we kind of became friends.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, that flip. Huh.
So
Um,
I think it's been, I mean, a lot of it's been just being my instincts were wrong about leadership, or being a leader or whatever. And I don't know how I developed them, but I learned some hard lessons and then started to just realize I wanted. I realized too, I don't want to treat. I can't treat people the way I want to be treated, or I'm comfortable with being treated. Like I don't like when people are indirect or subtext or imply things. I just like people being blunt. I
mhm.
don't mind people arguing with me, disagreeing with me. I don't mind a little yelling here and there, but I'm like, it's not for everyone.
Right, right. Yeah, it's definitely a cultural thing. individual, like how'd you grow up,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. Yeah, yeah. I've certainly seen that. And it seemed to me that figuring out what's first of all the least common denominator,
Hmm.
and then how do you level that person up, to where you get to an average or a mean or median, like something, right? Because
Yeah.
if you go to the least common denominator, then a lot of the team is not really happy.
Yeah.
So it's always seemed like I've got to bring them up. Um, that's interesting. That is interesting.
One of the problems I think that I've had as a in the leadership role is having tactical skills and being having like the individual contributor skill. And so I'm pretty good at a couple things I know I'm good at, that are not necessarily the kind of things that people lean on me for. They know I'm good at coming up with good ideas. They know I'm good on like product design. They know I'm good at like concepts and developing ideas and really like solving problems.
Hmm.
And my background is much more in like product design and product definition and even like product marketing, positioning, that kind of stuff. Um, I guess the other mistake I make is I mean, outside of work, I'm extremely outgoing guy, and I'm like I've got lots of friends, and I'm but you know, some people are like, wow, that guy's a jerk, It's like,
Oh,
but my friends would be like, oh no, but he's a super nice guy, and I'm like, yeah, in the wrong context, I'm not. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, when it comes to
funny.
work. But in social, I'm like, yeah, I'm a really easygoing guy.
That's so interesting. What is it about the work that changes you behaviorally?
Um, I mean, I can get really into something, and I mean, maybe sometimes I get too far up my own, derriere about something, or
Ah,
I can be, a lot of times I can be obnoxious and arrogant about something and realize like, I'll start to make people feel stupid or condescending about something. And a lot of it's because, I mean, the place that I got fired, it really came down to like, I wasn't in a good place mentally because I'd moved to Chicago. Um, Things kind of cratered. That was right when the first tech bubble blew up.
right. Yeah,
2000. So
2000s.
I
Yeah.
landed in a place I did. There was a job that it was like of the list of jobs I was interviewing for, it was the one I wanted the least, and it was the only one I got. So I wasn't even happy there to begin with. And the guy that I was at button heads with was always kind of doing end games on me on stuff. Like I was in charge of product, and I don't think he realized like he wanted the job that I was doing, and he thought he was kind of qualified for it, and he wasn't.
Mm,
I had come in with like, I got 10 years of experience at this point, and I'm working with people that, there wasn't that many people who had 10 years of technology, or like I have web experience that goes all the way back to like almost day one.
right.
I worked with NCSA, and when I first started in web development, we were emailing NCSA when we updated stuff. So I was in this spot where I was like, let's just get this done. I know what I'm doing. Here's how we should do it. And he would take stuff, and then he'd go to the engineering team and tell them to do something differently, and then stuff would break. So we got this meeting, kind of a come to Jesus meeting with me and the boss and him, and he said, you talk to us like we don't know what we're doing. And the boss went, yeah, you can do that to me too. And I turned to both of them and I went, because you don't. I
Oh no.
go, this is not fair to me. I can't keep pretending that we're on the same page just because you want to be. Like I go, I've been doing this a while, but it's not just that I have the experience and time. It's the fact that you guys are using the terminology incorrectly. Like you're over there talking to these engineers using these terms about object-oriented programming, and you don't know what they mean. And I said, you're causing a problem. And it's just like it was that kind of thing where I'm like, I don't know if you have experience and if you've got, and I mean, you work with engineers. I mean, sometimes, these guys, they know what they're doing. They've been doing it for so long. It's like to have them stop and explain it, even though they're going to do the work. It just, it's frustrating because you are kind of like, well, it's like project managers will ask you stuff and you're like, how many keystrokes do you want me to tell you it's going to take? Because at some point, it's going to be done when it's done. I have no incentive to lie. The longer I sit here talking to you, the less time it's going to take to get finished, you know? And if you knew anything about how this stuff would be done, you'd be doing our job. You wouldn't be, making Gantt charts and junk. So I'm not, so you can see where I'm coming from. I mean, I've used to working on stuff, being self-managed when it comes to making something.
Right.
So I got a lot to get over about myself.
Now it's I I I haven't been doing this as long as you, but when I started, the very first product that I helped somebody build was before browsers had graphics.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
like Gopher days and all that
yeah,
stuff.
yeah,
Waze. Yeah.
yeah. Um, and and then all of a sudden graphics showed up, and everybody was like, "Oh, now this is interesting."
Yeah.
What how does this stuff all work? And who's got the better dial-up modem?
Uh-huh.
That
Screen
was
scraping and all that stuff back
yeah,
then.
it was just yeah, and the rarity of having a database behind your website,
Mm-hmm.
because that was still such a new, like, we actually, the company that I was the first company that I coded for, um we got on somebody's beta program, this company out
Mm-hmm.
of Canada that had uh oh god, I'm trying Butler was the database.
Mm.
Like, you've
Yeah.
probably never heard of it, right? But
Yeah.
they had this whole stack where you could actually like build the database, build the front end. They had magic in the middle, you know.
Yeah.
Um and I remember we were building these database driven websites, and people were like, "How are you doing that?"
Yeah.
We were like,
CGI bin.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was funny. It was wild, but yeah, that was, and like
Earl with it.
e-commerce was like, nobody had any e-commerce stuff. So,
Right.
we hooked up. We were trying to process credit cards,
Mm-hmm.
and we got PayPal,
Mm.
and I had to figure out how to get their stuff to work.
Yeah.
And it was because I was kind of the like guinea pig guy that would just go figure junk out.
Yeah.
And oh my god, it was horrible. I just remember like trying and trying and trying, and like stuff kept breaking, and I was like, dear God, this is insane. Now it's like a cakewalk. Nobody knows that.
Oh
That's
God.
funny.
I mean the night and day from like say with web development and
Yeah.
putting things it was it I mean there's so much now like this is why I feel less impressed with them young kids writing code. It's like they're standing on the shoulders of giants,
Oh,
right?
right. Yeah.
Frameworks and stuff. And
Yeah.
I mean, when I first started doing the first website I ever did, I had to do it in simple text, the text editor that came with a Mac.
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then I built my own web editor using HyperCard, and then I built my own web editor using FileMaker. And this is before like SiteMill and PageMill and NetObjects and all these like WYSIWYG apps had
Right.
come
Right.
out. And like I said, I was
Everything was hand coded.
yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I worked for Loyola Medical Center, and we were doing the biggest medical education website in the world. And again, we would just build the site, and I would just email Kim over at NCSA whenever we had a new update, and they would just update the Mosaic homepage. That was the web, you know.
Yeah. Wow.
And then a bunch of us that were working at Loyola Med Center were sitting around going, "Yeah, man, we should be thinking about this for commercial sites." And everybody just kind of laughed. And I want to say maybe 2 months later, nobody was there anymore. We were all doing it like shooting turtles in a bucket. I mean, it was, and I remember I just like hand off a floppy to some ad agency and go, "Here's your website, and give me a check."
Nice. Those were the days.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such a, it's like such a different thing, because now all that stuff, there's so much off the shelf.
Yeah.
Like, people are pinging me all the time, like, we want to build custom software for you. And I'm like, why?
Right.
There's like,
Oh, yeah.
there's so many things that I like. Why would I need custom software? I don't, the first rule
Hold
of
on.
software is don't write code.
No, the hard thing right now is like death by a million SaaS bills, though, right? You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
look at something and I'm like, "Ooh, that's integrated," and then it's like Zapier, and I'm like, "Oh God, hard pass." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, Jesus, like there's now where the complete extreme, right? Where everything is now like a SaaS product that's got to be stitched together, and it's $24 here, $18 there. Call for pricing, or
Right. Right.
it's only $3 a month, but if you pay annually, but if you pay monthly, it's $70 a month.
Right. Right. Right.
And I
Right.
only need it for like a week.
Right. Yeah. And then you have AWS, where
Yeah.
all the bits and pieces, and then when you go, you're like, okay, I need to stop, and you can't figure out where the money is going. You're like, wait a
Yeah.
minute, I thought I turned everything off. Why am I getting billed $3 a month?
Yeah. Like
What's
having an AOL account and dying. It's
Yeah.
like 17 years later, you're still paying for AOL.
Oh my God, that's too funny. I'm not paying for AOL after 17 years. I did manage to shut that off.
Yeah. You
That's
didn't just
funny.
manage to do like one a month with those CDs and the floppies that came in the mail. Remember they carpet bombed the world with
Right,
those?
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Kids said they don't get to have that fun experience. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
Um, so people that you've like over, like, you mentioned, people you've looked up to as managers. Like,
Yeah.
who are some of the people that really you're like, oh, that person had a really good philosophy, and like, what were they doing that had that caught your attention?
So in different stages. So my manager, Lois Router, is the woman I was talking about. That was one of my earliest bosses. What I liked about her is that she would absorb. Like I was young, I was on a team with people. I worked at Apple a couple different jobs, and this one was worked with them in Chicago after leaving California. And I was working with a team of like sales engineers. That's what I was doing. It wasn't the
Mm-hmm.
right job for me, but I was working and supporting salespeople. And I was really frustrated often by them because they were always like fetch a rock kind of stuff, ask me to do stuff. But what Lois was really good at was helping me with things like, understanding things from their perspective and like they have different goals and kind of like you want their job, oh, they got it rough too. But she was really good at things like developing the technical skills from a practical standpoint, like the feature function benefit. She was really good at helping me
Mm.
like not nerd out and understand. So that made me better with my job, like understand the business problem. So that made me better, like what I like, I think it was even her that even said, my job as your manager isn't, to keep you employed, but to keep you employable. And she also was she was good at looking out for us as a team when Apple was going through layoffs like monthly. So those are good. Um, Another manager I had, and this was at Apple when I went back the second time, was a great guy named Chris Gulker. Sadly, he passed away about 10 years ago.
Oh, bummer.
Awesome manager. Anybody that worked with him knew he's great. But also I could relate to him because he came from the tactical world. Let's put that. He'd been a photographer at the San Francisco Examiner. So
Oh,
he knew the job that we were, and this was a cool job I had at the time. I was like the head of creative markets. The whole creative like industry was like my coverage for
oh,
Apple.
nice.
And Chris was great because he was just like, helping me with like follow my instincts on stuff. But again, he was the first boss I had that kind of clear the weeds for you so you can get your job
Right,
done.
right,
I'll stay here and take the heat or, you know, let's get stuff done. And he had rescued me from a layoff, which is something that always made me like him a lot.
right,
Apple was blowing up a group and I was one of three people out of 250 that survived just because he heard me say something in a meeting and asked what was going to happen to me, and he picked me up and put me on his team.
nice.
Um, he wasn't always, I mean, I wouldn't say he was always good at like the nuts and bolts of the administrative stuff, like, filling out an HR, that kind of stuff. But as far as like professional development and stuff, he was great. And like again, it was mostly like helping me support learning as I go you
Yep,
know.
yep,
But yeah, the managers I've liked the most have been the ones that are, tell you what you don't want to hear sometimes, or, they do take your side. But what I really like, in a leader is somebody who's knows they're, in the meetings that you're not in, they're representing your best interests
yep,
and, they're actually being leaders. I think there's a dearth of people with actual leadership qualities that just like being a leader. They like they're like, they're building fiefdoms and they're building, there are people I've seen, and I have seen this in big organizations that I've been at as a consultant or as an employee. And you can just tell what the person's doing is building, building, and building so that they can have this huge body count. And then they just use that as an excuse to go work somewhere else to be a VP somewhere else.
right.
Yeah. So, it's, yeah. So, I'm trying to think of, I had a great manager. He was a guy named Jeff Hartley that I worked for at a company called Sencha. And what I love about him, Jeff has a military background, graduated from West Point. So the military has all these great expressions for things that, just happen in life. It's like, well, there's a full force multiplier, and he would say these things, but also like, one of these managers who I really liked because again, you could kind of go to him and complain about stuff and he would give you multiple perspectives. You could see both sides. And, a sign of an intelligent person is somebody that can take, the other guy's side on an argument,
Right,
present
right.
it. But also just like guy was a friend, like drinking buddy, like a good guy. He could be like that guy, he could turn it on and off.
Mm-hmm.
But that was an interesting management role because had my own company for 15 years and I went back to California and I was going back basically to be somebody's employee again. And that was a hard adjustment. And I wasn't going to just work for somebody else. You know what I mean? It was going to be a hard thing. I knew it was a big change that after 15 years of being a boss and being the guy that, is expected to say stuff like the baby's ugly and what's wrong and all that, going back into an environment where people really don't want to hear employees say what's wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
You didn't throw out like Simon Sinek or any.
Oh, I hate all those guys. I mean,
Okay.
I'm just most of
Interesting.
these guys that sit around and talk about this stuff, it's like do the work and people will find out. I mean, I don't know if I hate Simon Sinek. It's more like that that there's that. I mean, it's the ballroom bullshitters, as I call it. I mean, these people are like, they're going around talking about leadership like it's this great thing. It's like entrepreneurship, you know what I mean? It sounds like fun, but it feels like work. And
Right. Right.
all these people that act like, somehow being a leader is this great thing and oh blah blah blah. And you know, but you're just sitting in a chair on a stage like 5 days a week. Like, who are you leading? What are you doing? I mean, when do you have time to do the job? I mean, if you're on Twitter, even, at all, like I don't know how you get anything done. And why would you waste your time doing that if you're going to complain about not having, if you're so busy and so much and all that stuff, then why are you wasting your free time on Twitter? What little free time you have. Just do the work. Don't talk about it.
Right. Right. It's interesting. It's interesting because so I have some complaints about people that talk about leadership.
Mhm.
And I think my biggest one, the thing that I've like banged my head against over and over again is this gap between the philosophical perspective that they have. Like, I totally love the idea of like getting the weeds out of the way so people can do their work,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
that's a huge thing, right? But the how to do that effectively, nobody talks about,
Yeah.
right? It's like there's this gap. It's the knowing doing gap, right?
Yeah.
I keep looking for somebody to explain like how they think that works,
Hmm.
and I keep not finding. So I'm actually writing a book right now to
Oh,
actually
cool.
to actually bridge that gap,
Yeah.
um, because I have some perspective on it, having done that for a long time now.
Yeah.
But I think yeah, it's interesting. Yeah.
Well,
It's
there's a weird thing. So, for instance, like, the Peter principle, right?
oh yeah.
Somebody that's a really good practitioner, reaches their level of incompetency when they're put in as a manager or
Right.
whatever. That's like the Peter principle. And so, I mean, you have these two challenges with leadership, or especially middle management, which is on its way to whatever, is that because like there's like high level leadership like a Steve Jobs, for instance, where it's like he makes his own, he made his reality distortion field and he made his own destiny and all
Right.
that stuff. And but middle managers are different, right?
Right.
They're hired to do these things. So a middle manager, you either have somebody that has like individual contributor skills and they know what they're doing, but then they can't get their hands out of the suit, they can't stay out of it. And then, or you have the other, which is probably the one that frustrates me more, is the person that's like zero tactical skills, right? And doesn't really understand how to do the stuff. And so they're often asking questions that don't help. They're
Right. Right.
they're constantly just like, when are we going to be done? Or stuff like that. So, there's, like I'm not sure the to me the right mix would be somebody who knew how to do the thing that the teams they manage does, but
Right.
not so that
Right.
they can roll their sleeves up, and
Right.
jump
Right.
in and just be, a more expensive version of an individual contributor because there's a lot of risk with that because that person will, you know, they could they're preventing the people from learning from their own mistakes.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
then
There's a
the other
balance there.
yeah, and then the other side is the person who the no experience person who doesn't know that how people will learn from their mistakes. They just want them to avoid them all at all costs, and doesn't understand why everything seems to take so long and blah blah blah. But like to me, the right mix would be somebody who like knows how it's done, but waits till somebody asks for help.
Right. Right.
Right? Like for me, like I had my own agency, I had my own like UX firm, product design
Hmm.
development firm, and I was started as one, and then I grew, and we were about 10 people at one time. And the thing that really helped me understand like two things was one, when you have your own business, you gotta avoid the practitioner dilemma, which is like you often start a company because you're good at something,
Yep.
and then the client loves you, and that's great for a while. But then the problem, you're the product, and so you can't extract yourself. And then it's big. You get a second project. Uh-oh, now you're host because
Right.
client
Right.
one doesn't want to share you with client two. So so I knew I had to get out from under that trap. So by hiring people. The other was like learning that, oh my God, these people that work for me are billable hours that make me money.
Yeah,
You're like, oh my God, like I could keep doing this and keep billing, whatever, or I could keep billing the client the same rate as the agency, but I have people to do this. So you
sure.
start to learn the wonderful art of delegation
Yep,
and
yep.
and then understanding stuff and letting people, letting, like I said, like you got to let people make mistakes because that's
Oh yeah.
how they learn. I mean, because
Right,
if
right,
everything works right, so um, I think the idea of like learning, like knowing how something gets done, so you can say to people like, "Here's what I want it to be. These are the outcomes I'm looking for." Working with engineers, the things I liked was that they would tell you things like, "Don't tell us what to do, just tell us what your problems you're trying to solve for."
right, right,
Right. Don't tell me this. Don't tell me it needs to be that thing because I'll give you that and you won't be happy. Don't I won't give you what you want. I'm going to give you what you need.
right,
You
right,
know, and so how to get people. Because I think a real dilemma, like in the middle management thing, is you're the middle manager, and you're trying to go here and achieve a higher strategy. But
right,
meantime, you have a bunch of people that sit around going, "What do I do next? What do I do next?" And it's like, well, they're good at executing, but they have to be told every
right,
single thing to do.
right,
And at that point, you stop and go, "Oh, I might as well do it myself." But and then that's the trap you fall into as a manager. So you don't want to do that. You do need to take the time and stop and go, okay, maybe what we do need to do is talk a lot more up front, have a little more conversations, have
yeah,
people like kind of prototype their thoughts out more and go, okay, and then really strive to make sure your people are willing to ask questions and not be afraid to ask them because that's
yep,
my sign that things aren't going well. I got guys
yeah.
working on my roof right now, and they're fixing our balcony and stuff. And the thing that scares the bejesus out of me right now is they don't ask any questions.
Oh,
And so I'm worried I'm going to find like the house painted three different colors that I didn't ask for. So the not asking questions is like as a leader, that's probably the first thing you should worry about. People asking questions is a great thing because it means they're engaged. When they're not
right,
asking questions and they go into a meeting and then everybody nods and go, yeah, and they know how to look the part, you're probably in danger.
right. Yeah, yeah. That's interesting because that's one of the things that I've always tried to get my teams to do is because one of my mental models is I rarely want to be the smartest guy in the room,
Yeah, right.
right?
Yeah.
Because then because if I'm not smart in a given moment
Hmm.
and I say, oh, we should do blah blah blah, and the team doesn't have the courage to go, that's a dumb idea,
Yeah.
right? Then we're gonna go down a bad road, and I don't want that. So I'm gonna be the last one to talk, and I'm gonna be praying that somebody else in the group's gonna come up with a better idea than I have,
Yeah.
and that into building their psychological safety up is a is one of my main goals
Well, you've
to do
shed your
that.
ego, which I wish more people would do if they learn that,
Is
because
what?
the ego is what makes some people bad managers because they
Oh yeah, yeah,
their
yeah,
leadership and ego are part of the same thing, and
yeah.
being like egoless is the ultimate flex, really, right? Like if you're a great
Right,
manager and you just seem that's why that Jeff Hartley I told you about. What I loved about him is like, you know, he had plenty of ego, smart guy, has a lot of amazing credentials, but at the same time, like a guy you could have a beer with and wouldn't make you feel
right,
stupid,
right.
you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. It's I think there's a piece of it that's about having built self confidence
Hmm.
on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's also like one of my really early mentors around leadership um, told me that my job when I first started leading teams was 100% to make them super effective.
Hmm.
And I transitioned from being the guy writing the code to
Hmm.
hiring a team of people that were writing the code.
Hmm.
And I went to him and said, look, I can't keep up with writing all the code I've been writing and getting all these people to do all the stuff I need to do because like I'm
Yeah.
giving up sleep right now and it's affecting my health. And he was like, oh, no, 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 stop writing code. Don't write code
Yeah.
ever again. Like I really don't care if you never code. Those people need to be efficient. And I was like, oh, that's a whole new game. Okay, I can go play that game.
Yeah. Yeah.
What do I do
That's
now?
such a freeing,
Yeah,
so freeing to hear that from somebody.
Yeah. And
Because you do kind of think that as you grow in your job, it's like you just keep lumping it, because that is kind of how some places work. It's like whatever experience you brought in the door, you know. So you have this. I like the expression. A friend of mine from one of my good friends from high school, like my best friend from high school, says it's like some people have 20 years experience, and some people have done the same job 21. What is it? It's very
yeah, yeah,
fluid, but it's the same job. They're doing the same. They've had the same year 20 times.
right, right. Yeah, yeah.
And
And
and a manager that wants people to grow out of their job, that's
right.
the thing you want.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to
Um,
ask them, where do you want to go next? You know,
yeah,
what how do I set you up to get to the next place?
yeah.
Right.
I mean, one of the things I look for. So I have a design background. So I originally thought I was going to be like an ad agency creative director or some goof muckety muck like that. And I fell into tech, and I developed a lot of technical skills over the years. And something like, I mean, I would consider myself like a very advanced user experience or like user interface person, because I can make a product. I can actually write code, but I can also design things and conceptualize them. But when it comes to things like visual design and the aesthetic side of things, I am always looking for somebody who is like humble. Like I always want to work with somebody now. And I didn't always think this way. In the past, it was always like, well, I'm going to be the everything. Now I look at it going, I want to see somebody else's work and go, damn, I wish I could have done that. Like I want to be
Right.
jealous. I
Right.
want to be jealous of the output of somebody's work I see. So
Yeah.
now if I work with a designer, like you say, being the smartest guy in the room, I agree. I sure don't want to be that guy. But also like, I don't want to be the most talented guy in the room either, because
Hmm.
I want to see something surpass me. So if I'm working on something and I look at it and go, I might be saying to myself now, as the old me might have been an asshole about it, but the new me is kind of like, I see something going, I could have done that. I'll say that to myself.
Right.
I'll be
Right.
like going, that's not even my standard. Now, that's what I'll look for. But I'll
Right.
also,
Right.
also gauge it and be like, if this person's trying to present themselves as something, higher up the pecking order and they're presenting this, then I'm like, never mind. If it's somebody younger, then I'm like, oh yeah, let's develop, let's
Right.
grow and
Right.
give some examples of, where you want it to be. I had a really young guy working for me with my old firm, the agency I had, who, because he didn't know better or whatever, had once said, like, why he basically flat out said, like, why he wasn't getting stuff done. Because he goes, we've had so many meetings with you where you'll say this today and tomorrow you change your mind. And
Oh,
we know that you're, like, what's the point? And I was like, wow, I wish I'd said that to several bosses of mine.
yeah. Yeah.
you know?
This is why I love agile as a
Mhm.
framework, is because when the boss does, is like, oh, changes their mind, right? I'm like, you just prioritize this stack of stuff. We just
Yeah.
sat through 3 hours of this. What's going on? And what do you want me to bump? And why? Like,
Yeah.
what's the huge dollar amount tied to this thing you think is better than that, right?
Yeah.
Because then I'm like, it's an easy pushback, right?
Yeah.
And almost never when I've done that do they go, oh yeah, you're right, I totally forgot about that meeting yesterday.
Yeah. Well, that's a good
Yeah.
thing about Agile is it gives the developers and the language of business pushback. You know what I
Right.
mean? Because
Right.
it,
Yeah.
it's and it's a nice way of saying things like, well, you know, what's that old expression too? Like I can I can write to your spec or I can walk on water, but both have to be frozen. Like that's how most engineers might say stuff, and then the business people are like, "Wow, he's disagreeable and snarky and stuff." When it's with agile, you say those things. I think one of the things that can be frustrating with agile is it's in certain environments, it's like agile for thee, but not for me. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the other
Yeah.
organizations are like, you have your thing and you do your agile thing, and when you're, like you told we support this, and then they come along later and they throw a monkey wrench into what you agreed upon.
Right. Right. Yeah. I always see that part of my role as the weed remover is like insulating my team from that,
Hmm.
and doing it in a way so the execs don't hate me,
Yeah.
right? Like that's really the challenge is, you know, how do you want to prioritize? Like you just said this, and and
Yeah, good leader will go to the mat for his
yeah.
team and whatever, euphemism you want to use, but it's like you absorb a lot of the pain for them.
Right, right.
So
I think that's the job,
yeah.
because in my mental model, they're all awesome if I remove the friction.
Yes.
Right? It's the friction gets in the way, the weeds get in the way of their best possible work.
Hmm.
And so everything I can do to find and remove weeds gets them to level up.
Yeah.
And then I just rinse and repeat.
Yeah. Well, and
You
the
know?
people that like most people, especially on like the individual contributor, the kind of people you're talking about that have a middle manager or have a manager, they enjoy the work. That it's the work they like doing, and the
Right.
more time they can spend doing the work, solving the problem, or whatever it is they were hired to do, most people enjoy it. A good middle manager is somebody who enjoyed it up to a certain point and wants to stop and move on,
Right.
and
Right.
see it happen and likes to see it collectively. I used to teach at the Institute of Design in Chicago, and they had asked because I have this like whole prototype, everything's just a prototype, nothing's ever done mentality, and so they had me. I designed a class about prototyping and taught these D school students about it. And my first class, I had explained to them, I go, there in the world, in the real world, I said there's two kinds of people. There's work doers, and there's meeting goers. And your goal is to become a meeting goer after doing, like because meeting goers, they go, their life is broken up into 48-minute chunks because they leave meetings early and they show up to them late. And they go to these meetings and they make these decisions, and you're back at your desk doing the work. And these meeting goers keep going to things and they keep changing their mind. They report back to you, and they'll contradict themselves. For a meeting they have in the morning, they'll come back from lunch and have a whole great idea, and now you've got to change course and stuff like that. And so my cynical joke to them was like, is you're going to be paying this kind of money for a graduate degree, your goal is to stop being a work doer and get to that point and being one of them meeting goers, because that's where all the money is. And they I don't think they found it that funny because they hadn't started really working yet. But they,
Right. Right. Yeah.
like, you go into the work world thinking the work you're hired for is the enjoyable part. But, oftentimes a lot of decisions are being made by people who, that hippo, right? The highest paid opinion in the room.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because they're in meetings all the time and not having to face the challenges of doing the tactical stuff, it's, all they had was a thought, and
Right.
that thought was easy to come up with. And so, well, the next one and the next one and the next one, but each thought executed is like 100x,
Right.
like
Right.
in tactical things. And so, it's easy to be a perfectionist if you're not the one doing the work.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
you
I need
know
to
it
get that on
means
a shirt.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. A few of those. Yeah. Well, my old tagline, my old company was called Idea Momentum, and it was a UX product consulting. And our tagline, I got it trademarked because it was used so much, was because simple isn't easy. That's
Yeah.
why you
Yeah.
hired us.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I can. I mean, it's funny that you brought this because I have a New Yorker cartoon calendar, and it's just a funny coincidence that yesterday's cartoon is, I don't know if you can see it, if your viewers can see it, but I'll read it to you. It's kind of your standard office layout. So it's three people, one guy sitting at his desk and two people behind him, and the caption says, "Try to ignore him. I'm here making sure you do your job, and he's here making sure I do my job." Yeah,
Yeah.
you
Oh, that's
screenshot
funny.
that. Yeah, it's kind of on the money.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Oh my God. So what are you working on now, other than your
so
roof?
oh yeah, someday that I'm in my garage studio space or whatever. I got my man cave garage thing. So I'm currently I have a startup I'm working with a couple partners. It's called TrainSpot. We are AI training data marketplace. So for people who are tired of their copyright material being stolen by people like, our friend Sam Altman, who thinks it should be free, so he can get rich. TrainSpot is a marketplace for people who can buy, and it's basically matchmaking for people to buy and sell training data
Oh,
for
interesting.
AI, for LLM training and RAG
Yep.
and things
Yep.
like
Okay.
that. So I'm that's something, I'm one of the co-founders of TrainSpot and working on that. And then I still consult and freelance and do, like product design, product development, more or less like coaching. I will help people, whether it's build a product or help define it, or I'll help with management teams, try to help them figure out how to get their team to think on their feet, because
Hmm.
that to me is like the most important thing, is if you can get your team to think for themselves and not
Right.
feel like, not go renegade and rogue with, think for themselves, and and or the inverse of like worrying like that there's going to be, punishment for not doing things exactly how they're told. That to me, that's like the key to success is if you have a team that feels empowered to think for themselves and think on their feet and solve, be problem solvers as opposed to just work doers. That'll help. And so I, have various different techniques, but a lot of it is just trying to help people with, real problem solving approach to stuff.
Hmm.
So, um, yeah, so that's kind of idea. And then I don't know, I have I mean, there's other stuff. I'm always dabbling in other things. So, um, yeah, a lot of different hobbies, but yeah, I'm just more of like I hate the term serial entrepreneur because the real world is you just bouncing from one job to the next on a
Right, right. Just
yeah,
different
or
payroll.
waiting for the next big
Yeah.
thing.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. Cool.
So,
This has been,
and oh,
yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, I said this has been super interesting. Thank you. I appreciate it.
No, it's been
Yeah.
it's been a lot of fun. I
Yeah.
I did all the talking, but
Yeah.
I
That's the whole point.
yeah, well, okay.
Yeah.
I'm
That was
the right guy, I guess.
the, yeah.
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 I mean, is there any other, qu questions or anything else that I can leave you with, or any, if you were to ask, what keeps people up at night? I don't know.
Yeah. What keeps people up at night?
I guess it varies. I mean, right now, I think for me, the thing that keeps me up at night is always like, what's the, like, am I working on the right thing, and
Mm,
am I, you know, or am I just kind of, you know, eating, believing my own hype on something, as an
right. Right.
idea, or a thing
Yeah.
like that. Because there definitely is, or am I, like there are definitely times where I'm like, I should have followed my own instincts, and I feel like I'm following somebody else's, and
Right. Right.
and
Yeah.
then,
Been
um,
there, done that. I totally know that feeling.
yeah, because I mean, I can turn one of my, I guess, the double-edged sword is that I'm really good at somebody comes to me with an idea and I'm really good at helping like actualize it and think about how it could get done. But
Hmm.
that problem with that too is I can also take a lot of bad ideas and turn them into some good sounding ones, but they're not really good ideas and they're not
Right. Right.
sound.
Well, that's a critical thinking exercise, right? You're like, okay, X, whatever's in this box, right? Okay, what's all the data that's pro, con, left, right, other pattern match,
Yeah.
um, and who can I talk to that knows anything? Like for me, I'm always, it's back to not being the smartest guy in the room. I'm always like, who can I talk to that has perspective on this and an insight so I can learn something that I don't know that I don't know.
Yeah.
Because it's always those double blinds. I'm since I learned about double blinds in my early 20s in some workshop, I'm like, oh, that's the thing I want to minimize.
What is that like a cognitive, is that almost like a like cognitive biases, or what do you mean by double blinds?
So double blind is things that you don't know,
Oh yeah, yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
like it's the classic thing is there's a circle and they're like, here's a little tiny slice, this is what you know, and then there's a
Yeah.
little bit bigger piece, and here's the stuff that you know that you don't know, and then here's this big area of things you don't know, right?
Yep.
And getting visibility into those um, has always been helpful. And when I talk with people, I'm looking for that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's one of the reasons I focus on getting my teams to be really comfortable talking because they know stuff that I don't know that I don't know,
Yeah.
right? And if they'll whatever they say in the meeting, and I'm like, oh damn, wait, give me more on this because I need to understand this,
Yeah.
right?
Don't assume I knew that.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah, like
because
scaling software up is a good example of where that happens a lot, where people are just like, I hear this a lot because I get a lot of people who will ask me, well, they have startup ideas, they'll talk to me, and my my first question is kind of like, well, who do you know that knows how to do that?
right,
And they're like, well, I mean, I'm like, well, if you don't even know what it takes to make that, you're not
right,
going to build it. I mean, what you're talking about could take, massive amount of scalability, data centers, blah, 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 whatever, like the list goes on of what it would take to make something of the scale you think this would be. And
right,
they're like,
right.
I've seen stuff like this. I mean, there's Airtable and
Yeah,
you're just like, oh God,
yeah, yeah,
in the spirit of entrepreneurship. And it's kind of toxic, I think, too, to some extent, because we've been encouraging all these people to make stuff. And, whether you can, there's so, the question of whether it's technically possible is almost always yes. But the problem is that like the question of whether you should do it in the first place is needs to be asked like day one because you can't ask that question 6 weeks later.
Right.
It's I mean, like I have a reputation of being kind of like a no bullshit guy, and it's not because I'm like elbows out. It's more just like I kind of not good at I'm not good at censoring myself because I react to things kind of emotionally.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I've told people like I said I dropped the F bomb in a job interview, not realizing it, and I got the job. I mean, I still got hired. I was like, wow, all right. And I've been fired, for asking why. And I've been fired more than once.
Uh-huh.
And I've never been fired like the I'm sorry, but we don't longer need you. It's been things like you're really making things difficult here, or this might not be the place you want to be, and blah blah blah, and then ending it with my oh you want to hear my take on this
Right, right, right. Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, I worked on a project with a big company as a consultant, so it was fine for me because, like I said, I like the role I'm in more now because I'm paid to tell you the baby's ugly and
Right,
they want to know
right,
how to fix it. But this particular client was very difficult because their idea was, and this is 12, 13 years ago, was like, you know, we're building an app, the iPad app, and I'm like, all right, and every corner was like, why doesn't it look like the website? And I'm like the website already works on the iPad,
right, right,
but we're
right, right,
building an app, and I kept going, yeah, and and it was so hard for me to explain to them something that they will never grasp, which was like, you have these toolkits and these components, and they're built to be, and if you go and make a whole bunch of bespoke components and you deconstruct them and make them look like web components, I mean, I'm already 5 minutes, they've already tuned me out, but it was like,
right,
you know, but that was an example of like, well, you told us we could do this. You told us it was technically possible. Yeah, I did. And now it's my fault.
right, right, right,
So,
right,
so that's where I've learned like, okay, the question before I even take on the job is, well, should this even be done? Because I don't even think it's a good idea,
right, right.
and it's
Yeah,
a no-win situation,
yeah. Is
and I
anybody going to
think
pay for it? And that's yeah. I think
they'll
I've
get the
asked that
blame.
question. Yeah, it's like who's going to pay for it, and how much, and who's your five biggest competitors?
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, maybe, like
Well, you don't need to worry about that. You're consultant, but there's a
yeah,
good there's a book. I don't know if the book itself is all that great. I think it's called Minimalism. I mean, there's a million books out there with that kind of vibe about it. But one of the things that I thought that there's no point in going and reading this book, I'll tell you that. But there was
oh,
one
okay,
takeaway from it that I thought was good, and that was it was a whether it happened or not. But the anecdote was this guy who like sold his company once it was acquired. The long and the short of it, TLDR here is that you know act like a consultant even though you're an employee, and that consultant mindset will make you a better employee because consultants like myself, I got other stuff I want to do with my time. So
right,
I'll
right,
find things like, I'll find ways to avoid a meeting. I'll find ways to, get things done. I won't go to a meeting just to have a meeting, right? Or things like that. So if like even though you're an employee, if you act like a consultant, then the key thing, I think the footnote that I would say to anybody, this goes to like being the straight shooter, no BS guy, is you got to be that person from like day one, or find
right,
some kind of hard reset, because if you can't be, it's really hard to flip that switch. You can't be just a no BS person, tell it like it is, truth teller, or even like a consultant mindset if you haven't already set that expectation with people from the beginning. Like you got to
right,
open with
right.
it, right? You got to,
Yeah,
because otherwise people just think you're criticizing the culture, and most companies, like the lack of process in companies is what's so ridiculous. And when you're a consultant, you're always trying to get people to like agile, so difficult for some places because it's process.
right,
But that's all that most companies have. Like when people talk about culture in a company, it is the process that is the culture or lack thereof.
right,
And when people come in with another idea of how process ought to be, you're really attacking the culture, not but from your mindset, you're just sitting there saying, hey, there's a leaking pipe in the bathroom, and
yeah,
it's causing the stink that you guys all keep complaining about. But it's like, hey, that leaking pipe has been there since I've been here. And that, but the stink has been, we've been trying to solve that stink all along. So I don't know if that's a good analogy, but that that kind of thing of, the consultant mindset
I like that.
is a it's a good thing because I mean, as long as, and this is career limiting or good for me, but the way I've always approached my job has been as long as I'm getting something out of this, and as long as both of us are getting something good out of this, then it's a good relationship.
Right,
The
right,
minute it becomes imbalanced and one of us is getting less than the other, it's time to end it.
right, right.
You end it for me or I'll leave.
Yep, yep. No, it's good. I really I like that consultant mindset idea. It's I think that's a very freeing perspective to have in an organization. And it kind of goes back to you have to have some self confidence to be able to execute on that idea. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, because
yeah,
a lot of companies, they don't really reward. Yeah, I mean, the problem with a lot of businesses is that they don't really reward. How do I put? I mean, they don't really reward being effective.
right,
Right? You're graded on how well you played the game. You know,
right, right. Yeah,
so like if you were to find like again, it's like, well, this meeting could have been an email. But if we
right,
if we just did an email, then we wouldn't have had the meeting. And then what would there be to do for 40 hours a week?
right. Exactly. Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
yeah. I'm a huge fan of not doing stuff that's not effective. Like
yeah,
like I'm writing the email.
yeah. Well, and a word of advice to some people, like as a consultant. So I worked on a project for a couple of years, a big company as a consultant, but I also had a lot of other stuff going on, like a startup. I was checked out mentally. Like I was not engaged in this as I would be as an employee. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing as I learned as a consultant with these people, with this company, was that give it a week and it'll blow over. Yeah. I mean, that would and it was funny because I started becoming this incredible, like, there's a really old movie with Dudley Moore and Paul Reiser where Dudley Moore like decides one day to just be the most honest copywriter in the world, and I think it's called like Crazy People or something like that. But it's really funny because he writes really funny ads. But this job was like that. I started getting to this point where it was like, this one person was telling me because they had this mentality of the company was like, you would ask like, just about a consultant's, your first reaction is, well, why are we doing this? What's the point? Like
Right,
what's the goal
right,
are we solving for? And the response would always be like, well, fill in the name here. Boss wants this. That's what they're asking for, and they need to know. They need to know what's going to take, how long it's going to be. Basically, they want you to scope it, basically, so they can, I don't know, put it in their deck and whatever. And I kept saying, well, when do you need this by? And it's like, well, later today. And I'm like, that's not enough time. I know, but I need something, and I need you to get back to me. I go, well, I don't know. And she's like, but, and I finally said, well, why? And she goes, what do you mean? I go, well, I mean, if he's not willing to take no for an answer, then you don't owe him the truth.
right,
And
right,
she's like, what do you mean? She goes, well, think about it. I mean, if not doing this is not an if not doing it at all is off the table, then tell him whatever the hell he wants to hear. I mean, like that's just common sense, And same thing with these, they would have these projects and they were like, we're gonna have this thing in August. And I always joke, like, who's this August guy that we're always bending over backwards for? Because there's always these August deadlines people love because it's this impression that there's nothing going on in the month of August. But the the idea that they'd have these schedules and it's like we got to be done by August, and then they have all these different swim lanes, and this one's 6 months and this one's 6 months, and I'm like going, well, those all add up to about 36 months, and August is 8 months away.
right,
and
right,
and it would always be this kind of like, well, why are you like, why are you worried about that? I'm like, I'm not, but I am pointing out something that nobody else is willing to say.
right, right.
Yep. So
Yeah, that's the yeah. I love that. That is the consult. I like that consultant mindset. That's good.
yeah.
I'm going to borrow that. Thank you.